Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest installation of our live stream series. My name is David Polgar, sitting here in New York City, where most of our team of our nonprofit All Tech is Human is based. If you're new to All Tech is Human, welcome. And if you're a continued individual who's been heavily involved, whether it's in our Slack, our working groups, our gatherings that we have, our reports, thank you for all this involvement. All Tech is Human is all about tackling the thorniest tech and society issues and doing this with collective intelligence, changing the underlying pipeline of the people involved in this system, and then moving at the speed of tech. Our three-part process is focused on community building, multidisciplinary education, and the diversification of that tech pipeline. And that's why we have a host of materials such as a Responsible Tech Guide, Talent Pool, the Slack that I mentioned of 8,000 members across 90 countries. We currently have 5 working groups, a mentorship program that over 1,000 people have taken part. So a lot of different ways. So the point is, it's not just about tuning into this live stream. It's about staying involved, finding others who deeply care about issues like we're discussing today around synthetic media and deep fakes. In particular, as we've seen in the news, you might have heard of everything that happened with Taylor Swift a few weeks ago. Deepfakes and synthetic media is a technology that has obviously a lot of creative potential and purposes, but it also can be used by bad actors to harass, re-victimize, and create non-consensual image sharing that we'll be discussing today. As mentioned, and it's going to be run by my colleague Sandra, who's going to be brought up in just a little bit, who runs our partnerships and also our trust and safety vertical, and a host of incredible panelists that you are going to see in just a little bit. The point that we really try to focus on is tackling these hard problems by surfacing tensions, trade-offs, values, and best practices. When we think about a thorny tech and society issue like synthetic media, especially how it can be used for non-consensual image sharing, we think of areas that have underlying disagreements about where we should go, oftentimes unclear legal terrain, especially when this issue is something that we've seen with non-consensual image sharing. There's been a lot of issues where only a few years ago, victims of this had to utilize copyright law because we didn't have specific laws that were dedicated to what we called at the time revenge porn. And you had really pioneering legal scholars such as Carrie Goldberg and Marianne Franks, who was one of our incredible guests for today, who have really led the way and pioneered this. So without further ado, I'd love to bring up my colleague, Sandra Khalil.
Thank
Sandra,
you.
welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for this discussion.
It's definitely going to be great, also timely, well needed, and we'll follow up with all these resources in our upcoming newsletter coming out next week with all these incredible resources that many of our panelists are producing. So without further ado, I'm going to jump off stage, and Sandra, let you take this away.
Thank you so much, David. I have the pleasure of bringing on our panelists for today's live stream on deepfakes and synthetic media. Joining us is Dr. Marianne Franks, the Eugene L. and Barbara A. Bernard Professor in Intellectual Property, Technology, and Civil Rights Law at George Washington Law School. She has an expertise in First Amendment law, cyber law, criminal law, and family law. And Dr. Franks also serves as the president and legislative and tech policy director of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, the leading US-based nonprofit organization focused on image-based sexual abuse. Next to her is Belle Torek, the Senior Fellow for Tech Advocacy at Human Rights Campaign. Belle has subject matter expertise that informs HRC's strategy to advance LGBTQ plus safety, inclusion, and across new terrain for them, including social media, artificial intelligence, and emerging tech. She also holds an affiliate role with All Tech is Human and UNC Chapel Hill's Center for Information Technology and Public Life. And last but not least, Ben Colman, the co-founder and CEO of Reality Defender. Ben is a leading deepfake. Reality Defender is a leading deepfake detection platform helping enterprises flag fraudulent users and content. And over the past 15 years, Ben has scaled multiple companies at the intersection of cybersecurity and data science. And prior to that, he's worked at Goldman Sachs, Google, and holds an MBA from NYU Stern, fellow NYU grad, and a bachelor's degree from Claremont McKenna. welcome all.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So we get a pretty broad group in these live streams, so I'd love to do a scene setter, and I hope the broader group stays engaged while we do this. Dr. Franks, I'd love to go to you and discuss just what a deepfake is and how they work and what the difference is between the different terminology we hear, like deepfake and cheap fake and even shallow fake.
Sure. Thanks, Sandra. And I apologize in advance for my voice. I am recovering from a cold, but hopefully my voice will stay with me throughout this episode. So the term deepfake was coined by a Reddit user back in 2017, and it's kind of a portmanteau between deep learning, so machine learning, some kind of artificial intelligence dimension combined with the word fake, so to produce something that looks real but isn't real. And the distinction, just on a really basic level, between a deep fake and a so-called cheap fake or a shallow fake is that there are obviously lots of ways of manipulating photos to make them seem real, even though they're fake, that don't involve that kind of machine learning, that kind of sophisticated or formally sophisticated technology. Involves things like photoshopping or retouching, or even not really technology as such as false captioning or slowing down a video so that it makes somebody look as though they might be slurring their speech. So that's the basic distinction, is that these are presentations. They can be either visual or audio, and they are good enough to fool somebody or a reasonable person to think that what is being depicted is accurate when in fact it isn't. And the distinction is between the sophisticated deep fake machine learning type as a deep fake or digital forgery versus a shallow fake or a cheap fake, which is other forms of manipulation.
And Ben, kind of riffing off what Dr. Franks shared about the nature of a deep fake and a cheap fake, where do you see Reality Defender in this space, and what motivated you to undertake this kind of work of identifying deep fake?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. This is all that I know. I live my life at the intersection of cybersecurity and data science, and really building tools and technology that could protect companies and consumers against digital threats. As far as a company, we have the privilege of being the category leader in the deepfake and generative AI fraud space, but we only support companies and governments right now. And that's for two main reasons, which we hope to change. One is that computational power is very expensive. We need cloud compute. We can't yet run these locally on a laptop or an iPhone. But also we have no clear regulations requiring any platforms to do anything yet. And so we see a future where the platforms themselves will be responsible for detecting this type of AI fraud and not forcing the consumers, average people, our friends, our parents, to try and become experts at something which is fundamentally impossible. I don't expect people to be able to check code for ransomware or an APT or a computer virus. Similarly, within generative media, a human cannot tell the difference. You need AI to detect AI.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it speaks to the difficulty of also not having, unified business language around both regulating but even defining what this is, to be able to combat it effectively. And I know, Belle, you wrote a very timely piece in Tech Policy Press around this, including what David was teeing up earlier regarding Taylor Swift's deepfake and how the Swifties played a role in regulatory intervention. So can you talk about the advocacy that you saw researching that piece, and what else you'd like to share with All Tech is Human on that?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost, and I'm so thrilled to discuss the piece. Though I have to forward that it was a co written piece. My co author, the lead author of the piece, Ariana Abalafia, who leads disability rights at the Center for Democracy and Technology, couldn't make it today, but she and I worked closely together for years at the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative under Dr. Mary Ann Franks, who's here with us.
That's right.
We were really alarmed when this happened to Taylor Swift. Ariana, of course, is Tech Policy's #1 Swiftie. And of course, we both care deeply about these issues. And we've spent years studying the non-consensual distribution of intimate imagery, NDII, also sometimes termed non-consensual pornography or revenge porn, which is the act of sharing sexually explicit imagery, typically photos and videos, without a subject's consent. We have come to realize that the vast majority of deepfake videos, between 96 and 98% of them, are sexual in nature and are non-consensual pornography. So when we saw Taylor Swift, one of the most powerful, renowned, respected women in the world, being a target of this kind of pervasive harm, we realized immediately, well, if Taylor Swift can't protect herself against these kinds of harms and abuses, who among us can? And, we're really thankful to have seen Swifties and Swift's legal team and all of the people who kind of coalesce around Taylor side with her to take down as much abusive content as possible. But for most people, the threat of legal recourse doesn't loom as heavy as Taylor Swift's legal team. And we found this alarming, and we wanted to draw attention to the fact that right now, legal recourse for these harms are inadequate.
Yeah, and I know there's a resounding theme in your work with HRC because you're leading their tech advocacy work. What are you seeing in deepfakes and other forms of synthetic media as it relates to harm against marginalized community like the LGBTQ plus community and multiply marginalized communities?
Absolutely. So non-consensual deepfakes and harmful synthetic media on the whole are such an intersectional issue. On the one hand, we see non-consensual pornography and its disparate, overwhelming impact on women. And we think about it within the context of gender-based violence. I think about it through a slightly more intersectional lens at the Human Rights Campaign, where I also think about not just women, but folks who are gender expansive, non-binary, the ways in which we think about women and maybe exclude members of the transgender community. So we focus a lot on thinking about the ways in which AI and technology harm the LGBTQ plus community, especially amid increasing, surging anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. And I'm based in Florida and experience it firsthand. And especially amid an election year, we're really, really concerned about the ways in which these harms not only impact members of the LGBTQ plus community, but also democracy at large and lead to bad outcomes for everyone. One of the things that Ariana would have been able to speak about is the impact of these harms, particularly on intersectional and multiply marginalized communities. So all of this to say that maybe a Black trans woman who is the victim of a harmful deepfake could experience more significant harms with less access to recourse than maybe a white male counterpart experiencing a comparable harm. When you think about low income or disabled communities, these harms become even worse and more pervasive. So it's something that we're really mindful of now.
Yeah, and that really speaks to sort of the issue of the scale of proliferation of this kind of content, which brings me to my next question. Dr. Franks, you've made a great point that we've been able to manipulate imagery for decades. This is really an issue of the scale of proliferation. Could you speak more to how these deepfakes intersect with the broader information ecosystem and more broadly, the dissemination of disinformation?
Sure, and to underscore some of the points that Belle made and the piece that she wrote with Ariana, which we couldn't be prouder that these are CCRI alums who are bringing these messages to the broader public. But, what we see with image-based sexual abuse generally is that women and girls tend to be disproportionately targeted, sexual minorities tend to be disproportionately targeted, and the resources available to those groups tend to be fewer and far between. And one of the lessons that we keep trying to emphasize at CCRI is that we've had iterations of technology being used against women and girls initially that are then used in much more sophisticated ways, not just against women and girls, but of course against everyone in society. And so when we see, not just back in 2017, but in the 1990s, you see crude photoshops of female celebrities' faces onto pornographic images. And you had an attempt by those women to say, this is wrong, this shouldn't happen. And essentially the law ignored them, or if anything, sort of trivialized what was happening and said, this is just sex, or it's just famous people, it's just women. And then you see what happens next, right? Now you've got this very powerful technology that for a while, only a few people had the sophistication or the finances to operate. 2017, the person who decides to democratize that does it by, once again, taking female celebrities' faces and using them in this non-consensual way. And even then, 2017, to the extent that there was a panic among legislators about, oh no, we don't have a law against this, the panic was, what will this do for political questions? What will this do to elections? Which of course is a legitimate concern, but the crisis as it was happening in 2017 was a crisis about sexual exploitation. And now we are several years on from this, and we've still done nothing because for many years people said, well, we thought that it was going to be a really big deal in the 2018 election, but it didn't turn out to be. So what's the big deal? So you see this kind of reiteration of, oh, there's political on the one hand, democracy, election things that are serious. And on the other hand, there's women's stuff and there's sexual exploitation that our society has tended to treat as expected or deserved in some kind of way. And first, of course, that's a false dichotomy because political questions can also be sexual questions. Female politicians are sexualized in ways that do, in fact, directly affect elections and affects the fairness of their candidacies. But more broadly, things that happen to women and girls, it should not have to be said, but those are democratic harms. If we are targeting those groups for abuse and it's making them disappear, making them go silent, making them go dark, discouraging them from running for political office or from becoming lawyers or from becoming actors or becoming whatever they want to become, those are harms to democracy. Those are attempts to try to take a segment of our population and silence them and subordinate them. So what we're trying to emphasize at all times is no matter what the tools are, sophisticated or not, if they're being targeted at women and girls, that's enough of a harm and enough of a reason to act now. And had we acted in the 1990s, had we acted in 2017, we probably wouldn't be facing this moment where this could really happen to anyone at any time. And yes, it could mean that our elections might be changed. It could mean that wars could be started. Genocides can be facilitated based on false information. And so to speak directly to your question about the way it affects the information ecosystem, it does so in multiple ways, not just in the obvious sense of people will think that false things are true, but also in the opposite direction. You can have a deep fake that takes something that is true and makes it seem like it never happened. So one of the most interesting things to emerge, in the run-up to Trump's first candidacy, when he was caught on tape or the tapes were revealed that he was talking about grabbing women and sexually assaulting them, his defense throughout that time was, that's just locker room talk, or I didn't really mean it, or that's not what I was saying. And then when the deepfake conversation happened, suddenly he was saying, actually, that wasn't me on that tape. And that's just a taste of what's to come in terms of how people will use just the existence of deepfakes generally as a way to say that things that were actually true never happened. So we need to worry in both directions. The cumulative effect of that being, if you have a public that cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is false, you cannot have a democracy. You are setting that society up for catastrophic failure, because truth is essential to a democracy, and people have to be able to trust the media. They have to be able to trust transparency about the government. They have to know if their elections are valid or not. So we've had philosophers warning us since Hannah Arendt in the 1950s that this is how totalitarianism happens, when you make it so that people can't tell the difference between fact and fiction.
Yeah, that's such a compelling point, especially when we think about the implications of not having a shared reality in our society. And a resounding theme in these live streams has been the implications of half the population of women and girls going offline just not being an acceptable outcome of the kinds of harms that they are experiencing. Ben, I wonder if you have any reflections or reactions to the broader information ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dr. Franks said. I think that part of the challenge here is that a lot of folks put their hands up and say, but we don't have anything to solve for this. And our short answer is we do have something to solve for this. Not trying to pitch my own company. There's a few companies in the space, and we can do it programmatically in real time. It's nothing new. Platforms, for example, social media or streaming platforms, they already follow regulations to scan for CSAM imagery of underage people to scan for violence or nudity. When you try and watch a clip on YouTube of a football game of the Super Bowl, a lot of times it says, please confirm you're over 18. Please confirm you want to see this, because while it's not nudity or violence, it's an injury. And so, we look to other emerging regulations around scanning for the latest Drake song, which YouTube will not scan for because the RIA won a court order requiring it. And so it's not a new form of or new application. It's just another extension of different types of content moderation, which unfortunately right now, no consumer platforms are actually focusing on, to the extent they're actually reducing their impact. They're cutting their teams focused on trust and safety, cutting their teams focused on content moderation. And we see big companies, big banks, big media, governments understand the problem because it actually affects dollars and cents, or it affects lives. But the platforms that average people are using on their computer or on their phones aren't providing the minimum protection that they should. We have an election year where almost 70% of the world is voting in some kind of election. So we look to our elected officials, we look to our regulators to not block or ban these tools, provide the minimum guardrails so that average people can make more informed decisions and not wait till things have gone viral, not wait for community notes, which only happen once a million people have already reshared the latest Taylor Swift video, not wait for phone calls from your president claiming that election voting hours have been extended. So we expect things to change, but right now we are a year behind almost every other country. Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, even China have regulations on this, and we don't have anything yet.
Yeah, and I know the regulatory discussion is top of mind, especially because of this heavy election year. But even aside from election content issues, we are now touching on how that deeply impacts society at large. I'm wondering if you see a specific role for industry actors like Reality Defender and similar companies in, actually combating the role of harm and deepfakes. And additionally, do you see a space for effectively addressing the marginalized populations that are most profoundly affected? So what do you see industry actors doing here? What do you see the role for them being? And then how to specifically address marginalized populations?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been working on this problem for over 5 years. We were absolutely right. The problem was going to happen. We were wrong, though, how fast it was going to happen. The last election cycle, nothing happened materially, and then nothing happened for 2 years. And then suddenly OpenAI launched ChatGPT, and the word deepfake became a buzzword. Before that, we called it digital humans and virtual avatars. So we believe we absolutely have a responsibility to educate policymakers and our elected officials and regulators and also large industry providers who have a responsibility to use a tool like Reality Defender to protect consumers. Now, as far as marginalized people, absolutely, they're receiving the brunt of the challenge, but they're also unfortunately underrepresented in the tools we need to build our solutions. So unless you are a Caucasian male, you are underrepresented in the data sets. So, with our company, Reality Defender, we not only build models to detect gender media, we also build the data sets to actually train them on, because while we have partners and clients everywhere in the world, the data sets aren't truly representative of the real world. And it's a real hard problem. If there's anyone listening who is focusing on data set generation or curation or bias detection, reach out to us. We'd love to see how we could use it. But it's only become a bigger issue as these kind of marginalized groups are further and further underrepresented within the data sets needed to protect them.
Out of curiosity, is there an ethical way to incorporate those those points in your data, or those marginalized population, incorporate their perspective into the data?
We're trying to. We're reaching out to organizations representative of all these groups. We're also avoiding certain methodologies that might limit things. So we don't use race, because if you go on Wikipedia, it says that there's X number of races when there's really infinite. We use the Monk skin tone schedule, which is a gradient, so we can kind of cover everything. But it is a constant challenge, and we're constantly checking our models and our data sets for bias, for skew, and also working with our clients to further uncover potential future biases.
Dr. Franks, you have a significant scholarship on online harassment and violence, and looking to sort of the solution space, what strategies have been most effective in mitigating the detrimental impacts of deepfakes that specifically target women and girls?
Right. So as Belle mentioned, the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative has been working, and David mentioned in the introduction, has been working on the problem of image-based sexual abuse for some time. And, originally what we were really focused on was authentic disclosures of intimate data. And it's absolutely true that we've made a lot of progress on this now, that we've gone from basically a minority of jurisdictions having laws against this to a majority. But that being said, there are still some jurisdictions where there are no laws that actually specifically protect people against authentic disclosures or disclosures of authentic material. And there's no federal law yet that criminally prohibits this. So I want to emphasize, though, that where we got to the successful point, the modest success we've had so far, is by pioneering this three-pronged approach that CCRI takes, which is we need legislative reform where necessary, when laws need to be updated. We need to have technology reform, because a lot of times it's going to be the actors themselves within the tech industry that can do more and should do more, regardless of what the law says. And then we also need to provide support to existing victims and try to educate the public to not become perpetrators. So we're trying all of those things here as well, because it is non-consensual pornography includes things like digitally manipulated images. And so we are once again promoting model legislation in terms of what should be prohibited. And our research has shown that if we're going to have effective legal prohibitions, they are going to have to include criminal penalties, because mere may be useful for those victims who, maybe like Taylor Swift, have a legal team who have time perhaps, or have a team who can work on these issues. But litigation puts all of the burden on the victim. It requires money, it requires time, it requires access to a lawyer. And so by itself can never really serve as either a path for full justice for a victim, or really to deter someone from engaging in this abuse. Our research has shown, when we ask perpetrators if there's anything that would have stopped them from engaging in this behavior, the answer overwhelmingly is, if I thought I could go to jail, I wouldn't have done it. Not if I understood the harm, not if I could get sued, just if I would go to jail, I wouldn't do it. And that is something that is troubling for many of us who are, in every other respect, maybe criminal justice minimizers, right? Who would rather not see an expansion of the criminal law here. But unfortunately, when it comes to crimes and abuses against women and girls, we suffer from under-criminalization rather than over-criminalization. So this, the bitter pill that we're going to have to swallow here is that criminal laws are going to be necessary. At the same time, when we think about the various actors here, right, there's a whole cottage industry now of just deepfake porn, dedicated apps and services. So that as an industry needs to be fought. And that, I think, we do have to consider whether that means saying under certain circumstances, you cannot offer this kind of software or this kind of service, that it's similar to counterfeiting, right? You cannot own the means by which to counterfeit, right? So that's one approach. But then we also need to think about the relationship between the tech that's developing the images and where they're being distributed. The images that Taylor Swift gets created on a direct message or a Telegram channel or wherever it is, but they get distributed on X or some other major social media platform. And because of a law that we can go into some detail about, a federal law called Section 230, effectively, those companies don't have any responsibility for the kinds of harms that are being distributed and amplified on their platforms. And so I think part of that legislative response is not just prohibiting this kind of material, but also saying to these platforms that are helping distribute them, the search engines that are surfacing this, so that if you type in celebrity's name plus deepfake or nude, first results you get in Google or Bing are going to be these kinds of results. That should be their responsibility to take those things out. And it's probably not going to happen until they're actually held responsible and they can be sued for things like this. So that's the other piece of this that we're really going to need. And the last part of it is that educational part of pushing back on this notion that this is no big deal, because we do have this overwhelming sense in our society that women's bodies are public property, and that unless somebody's trying to do something so explicitly malicious, we should sort of leave it alone or excuse it or say boys will be boys or people make mistakes, and really have to emphasize even more today, now that it's so easy to hurt people with so little effort, that we have to really make it clear to people just how damaging lifelong the consequences are here. Like with other forms of non-consensual pornography, we have seen everything from PTSD to job loss to having to move your home to being harassed in public to suicide. We really have to make clear to people that this is not some frivolous or some kind of trivial abuse that they're engaging in. It is really serious and lifelong.
I appreciate your interventions there, especially the mention of reforming and meaningful reform to Section 230, which we could do a whole nother live stream on. And I will probably contact you for that, having read your scholarship on Section 230. I know that the response to your third point of protecting the individual, protecting themselves, some organizations have responded to that threat by calling for stronger media literacy, and that has varied rates of adoption across programs and initiatives. Belle, I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that as a way forward.
So while media literacy is obviously deeply important, I think that the idea of stronger media literacy as an antidote to harmful synthetic media and deepfakes is unrealistic, myopic, short-sighted, impracticable, and in a lot of ways anathema to like the body of law that we have around consumer protection and around entities that are most empowered to mitigate harm being charged with doing so. First and foremost, we know the technology is advancing at a rate that is a lot faster than that of media literacy, right? So when the generative AI boom of a couple of years ago happened in late 2022, we were able to pretty easily distinguish synthetic media from its genuine, authentic media counterpart, because we would see people with extra fingers and like eerie mouths with extra teeth and like Cheshire cat like qualities and all of these little quirks and things in the background that would demonstrate that this is not real. But we're getting to a point where technology is quickly improving, and it's unfair for the onus to be on just any consumer of media to have to go to the time and effort of figuring out what is and isn't real. I think that we have a lot of law already in place that is designed to protect people from falsity. We have laws against stolen valor. You're not supposed to pretend to be a cop if you're not a cop. We have laws against false light. We have laws against fraud. So it's not, in my opinion, it's not like deeply unrealistic for there to be some kind of AI regulation and oversight that takes this into account.
That's certainly on the horizon, especially with the developments that Ben has mentioned in other countries. I would love to take the last few moments to elevate some questions from the audience. So folks tuning in, please feel free to jot down some questions, and we'll take the first one here. Open to any panelist. Patricia says, I'm curious on the panel's opinion on the name non-consensual deepfake video. Do you have a preferred naming for this technology?
I definitely do, because that's such a, as with revenge porn, right? The way that became kind of the term, advocates were so concerned about that because that's a term that a perpetrator came up with, right? It is both inaccurate, it is trivializing, it creates all kinds of misunderstandings about what is what the actual abuse is. And I worry about the same thing with the term deepfake, because given the fact that it's a guy who, I assume it's a guy, whoever it was on Reddit who made this sort of democratically accessible, was doing this horrific, he was engaging in this kind of abuse against women. I wouldn't want to elevate that term. And I don't think it actually really conveys what we want it to convey. I much prefer the term digital forgery to give us a sense and to reinforce some of what Belle was saying about how it's not as though we don't know how in our law to deal with false information, that in certain circumstances, even though the First Amendment does protect a lot of false speech, there are certain core aspects of really harmful speech that is false, intentionally false, that we can regulate. Forgery is one of those, counterfeiting is one of those, so let's think about it in those terms. Digital impersonation, I think, is another way to think about it. And then to convey, if we're trying to specifically talk about pornographic ones, to talk about sexually explicit digital forgeries. And I just also want to take that moment to say something about the particular nuances and how we're going to effectively address sexually explicit deepfakes versus other kinds, because I do think that there's so much value in detection and disclosure when it comes to a lot of forms of digital forgery. So a lot of election misinformation or direct defamatory lies that are non-sexual. There's a lot to be said for having these provenance standards or detection standards. But I really want to emphasize those kinds of issues, and the media literacy point as well, are going to fall short in pornographic deepfakes. They're never going to work. And the reason why they won't work is because the harm is not just in thinking that this is true. Most people understood that the Taylor Swift deepfakes were deepfakes. There is a site or many sites that actually promote, in the name of their services, that they are false, that they are deepfakes. That disclosure and that disclaimer is not helping. When it's a sexualized deepfake, then it really doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It might matter up to a certain point in certain circumstances, but it's not enough to try to disclaim that kind of falsity and expect that to help, because the sexual exploitation and the use of someone without their consent doesn't go away through the use of a disclaimer. And the other thing I'd want to mention from the studies that have been done on the psychological effects of misinformation is that there's this thing called the illusory truth effect, which means that even when you're trying to point out that something is false, by repeating the lie in order to show that it's false, what sticks in people's minds is actually the false information, even when you're trying to correct it. And this is even more true when it comes to visual imagery, and people believe what they've seen on some subconscious level much more than what you're telling them about how this is not false. So any attempts to aim things at media literacy, detection, disclosure, disclaimers, important, but never going to be sufficient, especially for sexually explicit digital forgeries.
Yeah, and that's why the importance of counter messaging and anticipation in the information environment has been such an effective tool as well. The same poster has also mentioned, what about penalties for MasterCard and other payment companies that are used in non-consensual sexual deepfake platforms? I guess sort of looking at, putting an onus also on the financial sector. What could that look like?
I'll say, and I really like this idea, this approach. We've seen it in other contexts. So you may know about the kind of highly publicized controversy over MindGeek and Pornhub and some of those sites that were found to have been displaying on their sites non-consensual pornography, CSAM, child exploitation material. And the argument there was, well, not just about directly affecting those sites, but actually going to the payment processors and suggesting maybe you shouldn't be doing business with sites that are not being responsible about the content that they have. And certainly when you've got companies that are self-identifying as, deep fake porn or what have you, what is a payment processor that is a legitimate company doing processing those payments? So I think putting moral pressure on those kinds of companies and asking them to put a stop to this would help. Now, that's not going to help with some of the cryptocurrency, other kinds of issues we could look at, but it would help mitigate some of the harm that's being done.
Yeah, to end on a very positive note, I can say conclusively that we work with some of those large payment processors, and this is absolutely on their radar. The question for them is, how do they actually ensure they're actually checking to see if their clients, these websites or portals or platforms, are doing these things, and are they actually checking for it? So we hope there are some kind of larger standards, but some of the players that were mentioned are already thinking about this, and that's the leadership we're looking for.
Yeah, and that's also a deep regulatory question, especially for a highly regulated sector like the financial sector. Um, I'd love to leave it there, and thank you all for your interventions on this really important topic. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and if you want to learn more about this topic, please check out Reality Defender, CCRI's website, check out HRC's work, and keep in touch with us at alltechishuman.org for future such conversations. Thank you all for today's discussion.